Hey guys, tonight we arrive not with a bang, but with a breeze drifting gently toward the coast of West Africa, where morning light curls like steam off the ocean and the waves bring more than salt. They bring stories. You walk the shoreline barefoot cool sand clinging to your soles. The tide sighing in and out like the world itself is napping. Gulls wheel quietly above, and somewhere in the distance someone sings a slow rhythmic tune as they paddle past the breakers in a canoe carved from a single tree. The scent of wet wood and crushed hibiscus petals rides the wind. And just ahead of you, glinting in the seafoam like a dropped pearl, is a cowry shell. Small, curved, smooth as sleep. It fits perfectly in your palm like it was always waiting for you. White as moon milk with a slit down its belly that once resembled a smile, or, in some legends, an eye. You hold it up to the light, and it shimmers faintly as if whispering, "I've been important longer than money." And it has. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from tonight, and what time is it for you? Drop it in the comments if your eyes haven't already closed. Halfway. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch at the edge of the surf listening. The sound of waves is soft but layered, distant thunder from far-off breakers, the closer rush of foam, the occasional skitter of crabs. Everything feels suspended in that silver early light where the horizon barely exists, and time folds a little. Cowry shells used to be everywhere here, not just on the beach but in the markets, in sleeves, in secret pockets sewn into cloth. They clinked together in pouches. They were used to pay taxes to seal marriages to honor ancestors. Long before coins jingled and paper whispered, the cowry was already doing its job quietly, consistently, elegantly. You rise and walk further down the shoreline where fishing nets dry on driftwood stakes and seaweed curls like cursive script. A boy waves at you from a canoe, holding up a net with a few cowries caught in the mesh. They still come ashore sometimes, still wash up after storms carried by currents that once connected worlds. Because make no mistake, cowries are travelers. They're not native to West Africa. Most of them came from the Maldives off the coast of India, where they were harvested in staggering numbers. They crossed oceans and deserts, hitched rides in cargo holds, and camel packs moved from merchant to merchant like rumors. And when they finally arrived on African soil, they became more than exotic shells. They became currency. But even calling them money sells them short. They were symbols, connectors, portable trust polished by the hands of traders, priests, midwives, and kings. Historians still argue whether cowries became popular purely by utility. After all, they're small, durable, easy to carry, and can't be forged, or whether there was something deeper, something symbolic in that curve, that slit, that shimmer. Some even believed cowries held protective power, especially for women and infants, which makes them more than mere change. A mother might sew a line of cowries into her baby's cloth wrap for luck. A priest might place one beneath an altar for good harvest. A bride might wear them woven into her hair. And tonight, you carry one in your pocket, warm from the sun. You pass a grove of palm trees. Their shadows stretch long across the sand like lazy fingers. Somewhere nearby, someone begins sweeping their compound with a bundled reed broom. The bristles whisper across the clay. A new day begins. You reach a small fishing village. The houses are low and round, made of mud and woven thatch, painted in gentle swirls of ochre and faded blue. Smoke rises from cooking fires carrying the promise of yam and fish stew. And on a blanket near one doorway, an elder sits cross-legged, slowly counting cowries from a gourd bowl. Click, click, click. Each one laid gently into a neat row like beads or blessings. You sit nearby, just far enough not to intrude, just close enough to hear the rhythm of the shells tapping stone. The elder doesn't look up, but you feel acknowledged, welcomed. Your presence folded into the calm of morning like one more thread in the cloth. And maybe that's what cowries are in the end. Not just trade tools, but threads, woven into the fabric of life, from market stalls to marriage halls, from temple shrines to children's lullabies. Each one a soft sea-carved reminder that something small can still hold great worth. You hold your cowry shell a little tighter. It feels heavier now, not because it's grown, but because you've begun to see it. Not just as an object, but as a witness, a survivor of centuries, a teller of silent stories. The waves pull back. The tide shifts. Somewhere overhead, a hawk circles once, then disappears into the brightening sky. And just like that, our journey begins. You follow a sandy path inland, now the warmth of the Cowry still pulsing softly in your hand like a quiet heartbeat. As the village fades behind you, the terrain begins to change. The air smells different, drier edged with clay and dust. The ocean's hush becomes a memory replaced by the distant clatter of cartwheels and the rhythmic creak of leather straps. This is trade land. The ground beneath your feet has known centuries of footsteps, bare feet, sandaled feet, hooved feet, all moving with purpose toward markets that shimmered like mirages and vanished just as quickly when the season turned. You crest a gentle hill and see the faint outline of a caravan forming in the valley below. Oxen snort and shuffle. Goats mill around like uninvited guests. Traders in long tunics of saffron russet and indigo secure bundles to donkeys and tighten ropes on wooden carts. The hum of preparation surrounds you, half language, half ritual. You drift closer and hear it, the clinking of cowrie shells being counted, distributed, argued over. Not weighed, never weighed. Cowries are counted one by one. Each one chosen, passed from hand to hand, measured not just in number, but in trust. You stand beside a trader with a sun-creased face and a leather pouch filled with shells. He holds one up to the light squints, nods, and drops it into the waiting hand of another. It's a deal. No handshake, no receipt. Just the shell. A symbol of mutual understanding. A contract in calcium carbonate. And it's not just here. From the markets of Timbuktu to the coastal hubs of Lagos and Elmina, cowries made the world move. They traveled in caravans, crossed rivers, survived wars and droughts, adapted, endured. A single cowrie could buy a cup of rice, 100 a goat, 1,000 a bride. You walk among the traders now, catching snatches of conversation. One man gestures broadly, laughing about a journey cut short by a stubborn camel. Another barters fiercely over a bolt of indigo-dyed cloth. A woman with silver bangles explains the medicinal uses of a particular root, its name long and musical, and you find yourself nodding along even if you don't understand. Historians still debate how standardized cowrie currency really was. Did every region value them the same way? Were there quiet codes, subtle differences in weight or luster? Or did the very nature of trade, of conversation and context determine their worth? You pause beside a shaded tent where a young boy counts out shells with serious focus. 10, 20. 30. His fingers move with the certainty of someone who knows that numbers matter when you're feeding a family, when you're planning a journey, when you're proving your place. And beside him, tied with twine, is a bundle of polished cowries. Smaller, whiter, smoother. You recognize them. Maldives shells, prized for their clarity, their symmetry. The high-grade version. Imagine someone collected those halfway across the world, dipped them in coconut oil to make them shine, packed them in sacks, loaded them onto ships, carried them across deserts, and now they sit in a boy's hand on the edge of a trading hub beneath a tree that's older than memory. You find a spot to rest under that same tree. Its roots are thick and braided, its shade a blessing. You lean back, close your eyes for a moment, and the sounds swirl around you. Bells, laughter, haggling hoofbeats, the creak of a cart beginning its long roll westward. And always the soft tick of shells being moved. Click, click, click. They sound like rain on a roof. Like a grandmother counting prayers. Like time. Because this isn't just a market. This is infrastructure. A pulse. A system that allowed people to move, exchange, survive. A network built on trust and conversation and millions of tiny shells. You open your eyes and watch a merchant hoist a sack onto her shoulder and begin the slow walk toward the savannah. She carries cloth herbs and a pouch full of cowries. And that pouch, it'll pay for food. For news. For shelter. For stories told over smoky fires and sweet millet porridge. It'll pay for everything. And you can't help but marvel at the elegance of it. No digital passwords. No forged coins. Just shells. Nature's accounting stones. Ancient and smooth and perfectly shaped for a world without paper. You rise again. The caravan begins to move. Oxen grunt. Dust swirls. You walk alongside them for a while, watching the sun angle higher in the sky. The boy with the polished shells waves as he disappears into a crowd. The woman with the bangles nods goodbye. You keep the rhythm in your steps, slow, steady, measured. Like the shells. Like the trade. Like history itself, moving not in leaps, but in patient clicking increments. The caravan vanishes into the heat shimmer and you're left in the fading hush of its departure. The dust settles slowly, like memory clinging to your clothes and curling along your eyelashes. You linger for a moment, Then turn eastward toward the banks of a river you've heard whispered about all morning, the Niger. It snakes across West Africa like a giant in repose, feeding cities, carving borders, and threading together distant cultures with water instead of words. And nestled along its edge is a small riverside town, quiet, but always watching the comings and goings of trade. You arrive just as the afternoon heat begins to bloom. Palm fronds rustle above. Children dart between reed huts. A woman stoops to rinse yam skins in the shallows, her arms strong, her rhythm steady. You step carefully, your sandals brushing the packed earth, and hear it again, the soft chime of cowries. They're everywhere here. In necklaces worn by market women, in hair braided with pride, in belts that jingle faintly with each step, even in the beaded curtain that sways across a doorway where the smell of fermented millet beer escapes. You pass through it, invited by a glance, and find yourself inside a dim, cool interior. This is a resting house, half inn, half tavern, all community. A long wooden table stretches through the room, its surface carved with initials, prayers, and lazy spirals. Travelers sit elbow to elbow, sipping from clay cups, trading stories louder than coin. But every now and then, a hand dips into a pouch, and a cowrie shell clinks onto the wood. Click. It pays for a drink, a story, a listening ear, and it's worth more than the object itself, because in this world, the cowrie isn't just currency, it's continuity. It's a little nod that says, I belong here. I know the code. You take a seat near a wall, painted in soft earth tones. The mural depicts a woman in profile, tall, poised fingers, outstretched to release a handful of shells into the wind. The shells arc like stars into the river. Below, fish leap up to catch them. The meaning isn't spelled out, but you don't need it to be. You feel it. Something about giving, about trust, about return. You close your eyes for a moment. Somewhere a lyre begins to play. Not a harp, not a grand instrument from Olympus, but something smaller, 4 strings, maybe 5. Plucked lightly, like footsteps, on damp soil. It accompanies the low murmur of the room, weaving in and out like a spider in tall grass. Historians still argue whether cowries originally arrived on this continent through trade with Arab merchants, or if their arrival predates written memory, altogether brought over by the hands of travelers long before the first camel crossed the Sahara. Some say they were used first for ritual, then slowly absorbed into trade. Others believe the two were always one and the same. You sip from a cup offered by the innkeeper, its rim cool against your lips. The drink is earthy, a little sweet, and thicker than you expect. It leaves you calm, settled. A few more cowries trade hands nearby, each one exchanged without fuss, like breath. The shells aren't hoarded here. They circulate, always moving, always telling their story. And you realize something odd. No one counts them aloud. No 1, 2, 3. Just touch, glance, nod. As though the shells themselves speak their own tally. The language of trade and trust humming softly in each spiral. You rise after a while and step back into the sun. The river glints in the afternoon light, wide and slow like a god trying not to be noticed. Children run past with bundles of reeds, calling out to each other. Somewhere upriver, a boat creaks into view, its wooden hull, heavy with cloth, and salt, and cola nuts, and, tucked discreetly into oilskin pouches, more cowries. You walk to the edge of the river and crouch beside a woman weaving a mat. Her fingers fly over under pull twist. You greet her, and she glances up, her expression unreadable, then gestures to a pile of cowrie shells near her feet. She doesn't speak, but her meaning is clear trade if you like. You reach into your own pouch and offer 3 shells, careful to choose ones with no chips. Good color, clear ridges. She inspects them, holds one to her eye, nods once, and passes you a smaller mat, neatly woven, soft-edged, smelling faintly of palm. A fair trade. No raised voices, no arguments, no receipts, just respect. You carry the mat down to a sun-dappled patch beneath a tree and sit the fabric warm against your back. Overhead, birds call lazily. A fish jumps. The boat draws closer, sails sagging slightly in the heavy air. And beside you, someone has drawn a spiral in the dirt, a simple swirl barely the size of your palm. The symbol of the cowrie, the mark of continuity, of story passed through hands, not tongues. You trace it with one finger, not to change it, but to feel its edges. The spiral is never ending, always curling inward, then outward again. It reminds you of the river, of trade, of the people who move through both. And it reminds you of shells. Those strange little gifts from the sea that came to mean so much. You watch the spiral blur slightly in the breeze, and for a moment you imagine this entire land, its markets, its rivers, its stories braided together by shells, carried not just in pouches, but in memory, in dreams, in lullabies hummed by elders who remember when the first cowry arrived, smooth and silent, full of promise. You leave the riverside village with the mat slung over one shoulder, its simple weave soft against your neck. The road you follow now isn't paved, or even always clear. It wends its way through bush paths and long grass past groves of baobab trees and stone shrines tucked between roots, half swallowed by time. And the cowries come with you. Not in your hands, but in your thoughts. Little white commas punctuating the sentences of this land. Each one still whispering stories if you listen close enough. You walk until the sky begins to shift no longer. The hot overhead blue, but something more golden, drowsy, full of long shadows. The horizon ahead glows faintly orange like the tip of an ember just beginning to breathe. Somewhere in the distance drums echo, faint layered like voices speaking over each other in rhythm. You follow the sound, because how could you not? And that's when you find it a town mid-festival. No signs, no proclamations, just the unmistakable pulse of celebration. It spills through the dusty streets like a warm breeze. Children in ochre-dyed wraps chase each other with woven masks. Elders in robes of deep teal sit beneath shade canopies, sipping something steaming and aromatic. There's music from every direction, flutes, hand drums, gourd rattles clapping. You drift in unsure where the festival begins or ends. No one seems to mind. There are no gates, just rhythm. At the center of the open plaza stands a storyteller. Not elevated, not costumed, but somehow radiant in their stillness. They hold a small pouch in one hand tied with red thread. And as they speak, low and rolling like thunder made gentle, they lift a single cowrie shell and hold it up. The crowd leans in. No one interrupts. No one fidgets. The story begins with a journey, with a trickster god and a fisherman, with an offering made of millet and wind. But it's the cowrie that anchors each beat of the tale. Each time the rhythm shifts, the storyteller drops another shell into a wooden bowl at their feet. Click, pause, click, beat. You realize something. Then cowries aren't just money here. They're punctuation. They're timekeepers. They give stories shape. Historians still debate whether storytelling traditions in West Africa consciously adopted cowries as symbolic devices, or whether the shells simply infiltrated the rhythm over time as trade and tale intertwined. Some scholars point to specific griot lineages who used them to mark cadence, others to ceremonial roles. No one agrees, but you don't need footnotes. You're watching it happen. The storyteller's bowl is half full now. The air is thick with scent smoke from cooking fires, crushed hibiscus petals, distant rain. Someone hands you a palm leaf packet. Inside is something sweet, chewy. You nod thanks, unsure if it's dessert or medicine, and decide it doesn't matter. The crowd murmurs as the story twists. The hero is tricked. The river rises. A choice must be made. A final cowrie clicks into the bowl. Silence. And then applause, not loud, not raucous, but respectful. A shared breath released. You linger after watching people drift toward the vendor stalls. Bright bolts of cloth ripple in the breeze. A boy holds up a carved bird to his friend who shrugs. Two women laugh over a tray of carved ivory combs. And near the edge of the market, a man counts out cowries onto a goatskin mat. They're not new shells. Some are worn, faded. Others still gleam. Each one has likely passed through dozens of hands, whispered into more stories than you could name. You kneel beside a basket of them, offered for trade, and let your fingers sift through. They're cool to the touch, smooth light. One in particular catches your eye, not for its size or sheen, but for the tiny scratch on its side. A mark that looks almost like a star. You buy it with two simpler shells. Trade. Balance. A kind of quiet math passed down in gestures. Later, you sit near a fire pit, ringed with river stones. People are dancing now, slow and deliberate in lines that loop and coil like thread. You notice some wear cowrie anklets, the shells knocking together in time. Not just jewelry, not just flair. Music. Tally. Step counter. You think of other places, other centuries where people danced for kings or gods or war. But here it feels like dancing for memory, for rhythm, for the stories that need movement to stay alive. You close your eyes. The fire pops. A shell falls from someone's wrist and rolls near your foot. You leave it there. Because here, nothing is wasted. Nothing is lost. Even a single misplaced cowrie might be picked up tomorrow, bartered for salt tucked into a child's braid, or used to mark the start of a new story. There's a grace to that. A reminder that value isn't always in size or shine, but in the way something endures. You lean back on your mat and let the drums blur into the soft, warm dark. The cowrie with the star scratch lies in your hand, light as a sigh. And you think this one's going to stay with you. Maybe not for trade. Maybe just to remind you of this day. This rhythm. This world. Morning in the savannah begins with sound. First, the birds' soft fluting calls that ripple across the long grass. Then, the goats bleating somewhere behind a woven fence. A pot lid clatters. A rooster makes its single declaration. And a woman's voice hums a tune so old you can't place its beginning. You stretch under a thin cotton sheet and blink against the straw-filtered light. Around you, the village stirs. Smoke lifts from hearths like ghostly threads, catching the early sun in delicate spirals. You sit up slowly and watch the day arrive in pieces. The cowrie shell with the star-shaped scratch rests beside your mat. You turn it in your fingers, marveling again at its smooth coolness, its subtle sheen. In the world you come from, money is rectangular and rude, crisp and noisy. Here it clinks like water in a wooden bowl. It fits between your teeth. It fits between moments. And today, it's leading you somewhere else. You make your way out of the compound, careful not to step on the sunning lizards. A group of children run past barefoot, each holding a twist of cloth filled with millet cakes. Their laughter stays behind long after their feet vanish down the path. Your destination is a nearby market town, older than memory, and still expanding outward like ripples on a pond. The journey there takes you past termite mounds and painted stones, past men coaxing music from stringed instruments shaped like half-moons. The path is gentle, and the rhythm of your walk begins to feel familiar. Click, pull, thread, beat. The market itself is a hive, colors layered over smells, layered over sound. You see scarlet-dyed cloth rippling like water, wooden combs stacked like teeth-carved gourds etched with suns and moons. Chickens cluck under benches. Metal bells clang from somewhere out of sight. But your eyes go immediately to the small stalls where cowries are counted. There are no tills, no banks, just mats laid out and patterns traced in dust. A woman squats behind one such mat, her eyes bright, her hands worn smooth. She wears a wrap the color of ground turmeric, and her fingers are flying. She's counting cowries not in stacks, but in shapes, spirals, triangles, stars. You approach quietly. She looks up and smiles, then points to your palm. You hold out the cowrie with the scratch, and her eyebrows lift in surprise. "That one's traveled," she murmurs. You nod. "You don't say where from. You're not even sure it matters anymore." She lays the shell gently at the center of a sun pattern and begins counting around it. Other shells are drawn in smooth, ribbed, narrow wide. She hums softly while she works. Historians still puzzle over how such a delicate thing could anchor entire economies. How did coastal societies agree on values? How were the shells stored, protected, shipped? Some argue they weren't truly currency, just symbolic. Others point to ledgers, buried caches, and court records. Some call it proto-money. Others, proto-poetry. But standing here watching shells swirl like stars across a mat, you understand the answer isn't neat. It's rhythm. It's relationship. It's trust. The woman finishes her spiral and leans back. "You want soap?" she asks. You blink. "Soap." She nods toward a basket at her side filled with rough-hewn blocks. Shea butter. Good for travel. Good for old stories. You grin. You trade the star-scratched shell and one more from your pouch. Fair price, no haggling. She wraps the soap in a twist of cloth and presses it into your hand. You linger at the edge of the market, chewing a piece of roasted yam and watching as two traders begin a game using cowries as markers. It's not Mancala exactly, but it echoes that rhythm. Click, pull, thread, beat. In another stall, a boy is learning to count by laying out cowries in rows of 5, tapping each one with a stick as he recites the numbers. Behind him, an elder watches with pride, but no interruption. It's not just a shell. It's a lesson. You walk a little farther and find a weaver at her loom, feet, bare arms, strong, humming between pulls. A string of cowries hangs from her waist, like punctuation. Each beat of the loom coincides with the click of her foot on the frame. You swear the cloth responds to it, gathers it in, records it. A textile becomes a ledger becomes a song, and you're somewhere in the middle learning to listen. You leave the market as the sun tilts toward late afternoon, your pouch a little lighter, but your steps strangely steadier. The soap is tucked under your arm. The rhythm of the day is still with you. Click, pull, thread, beat. Later that night, as crickets begin to sing and the fire crackles low, you take out a piece of soft cloth and unwrap the soap again. You run your fingers along its surface. It smells like trees and stories, like something that was made slowly with care. You remember the woman's eyes as she looked at the shell. That once traveled. You set the soap beside your mat and lie back on the woven straw. A cowry on your palm. A hush in the night. And in the distance, the faint beat of footsteps heading home. Morning light spills in gently, the kind that filters through woven blinds and dapples everything like a half-forgotten dream. You stretch again, there's been a lot of that lately, and trace the weave of your mat with your fingertips. It's soft in places, scratchy in others, made by hand. Like most things here, and somewhere just beyond your reach, you hear it again. Click, pull, thread, beat. You rise not quickly. Nothing about your days now demands speed, and make your way through the village paths. Bare feet, brushing against dew-wet grass, and the occasional curious chicken. The smell of rice porridge and wood smoke trails you like an old friend. Someone calls out a greeting. Another just nods, eyes still heavy with sleep. You head toward the schoolhouse, not because you're enrolled or because anyone expects you. Just because the building is there, waiting, its thatched roof uneven, its mud brick walls full of warmth and scribbles. Inside, the children are already gathering, some seated cross-legged on the floor, others leaning against the wide beams chewing on stalks of sugarcane. And at the front of the room stands a teacher, gray-haired, patient eyes that flicker with humor. She's holding up a shell, a cowry, not as currency, not even as a measuring tool, but as history. She taps it gently on the edge of a wooden desk. Tell me. She says, who remembers what these were? For a few hands go up. Some answers are shouted money gifts. Magic. The teacher nods at each one. Yes. And more. She begins to weave a story, her voice as rhythmic as the marketplace griot. She speaks of river crossings and salt caravans, of traders with bundles of cloth and crates of cola nuts, of kingdoms that stretched across what is now 10 modern countries. She names cities you've never heard before. Cities that once gleamed with copper gates and perfumed fountains. Historians still argue whether these tales are literal or symbolic. Did a single ruler truly command a network of quarry-based trade from the forest's edge to the desert rim? Were the records poetic embellishments or economic accounts? Some say the scale was overstated, others that we underestimate it still. But in this room, in this morning light, the story feels true. The teacher holds up a small diagram. A map, hand-drawn, showing lines crisscrossing West Africa like veins. Each node marked not with gold or oil or blood, but with shells. You watch the children lean closer. Because it's not the currency itself that captures them. It's the connections. Every shell means someone carried it, and someone else accepted it. And somewhere between those two gestures, a world was built. The teacher hands out cowries, one per student. No two are alike. Some are dull, others luminous. Some are cracked or chipped, and each child rolls theirs between finger and thumb as if trying to read the stories hidden in the curve. You're offered one too. Yours has a groove that wasn't made by nature. A small carved spiral, deep and deliberate. A mark of ownership, a blessing. A code. You trace it gently. And then class ends not with a bell, but with a song. A call and response chant about rivers and rain shells and stories. The children leave in a tangle of voices, each holding their cowry like a promise. You step outside again, the air now warm and humming with insects. Down the path beneath the broad shade of a tamarind tree, you see a woman mending baskets. Her fingers move like they remember the work without needing instruction. You crouch beside her, watching the strands bend and give fall into pattern. And you notice, tucked in the rim of each finished basket, she's woven a cowry. One per basket. Always the same spot. You ask quietly why. She doesn't look up. For finding home, she says. You nod, though you don't entirely understand. Later, in a different corner of the village, you watch a ritual unfold. Not a grand one. No drums, no procession. Just two families sitting opposite each other on mats, elders speaking calmly, teenagers sneaking glances. Between them, a shallow bowl filled with cowries. Each shell placed down with care as words are spoken. Promises, terms, maybe even apologies. You don't catch every meaning, but you catch the rhythm. Click, pause, speak, click. The shells are both witness and participant. A kind of memory that doesn't fade like parchment or rot like wood. Afterward, someone scoops them into a cloth pouch and ties it shut with a bit of indigo thread. It is not opened again, because the memory now belongs to both families. You sit by the fire that night with your shell in hand, the spiral worn smooth beneath your thumb. You're beginning to understand why these things endured so long beyond empires, beyond borders, beyond the rise and fall of trade. Because a cowrie shell isn't just money. It's movement, meaning, memory. And here in this place, where everything has its own slow rhythm, that's more than enough. You place your shell beside the fire and listen. Click, pull, thread, beat. The fire's coals pulse softly beside you, and the night has a velvet hush to it, soft enough that you can hear your own breath. The quiet creak of a chair nearby, and the distant hoot of an owl complaining about something owl-specific. The shell lies beside your hand, pale against the woven mat, its carved spiral catching a lick of firelight, like a knowing wink. You smile to yourself. Sleep doesn't come just yet. Not when your thoughts are still trailing after the stories of earlier. So you rise careful not to disturb the rhythm of the quiet and walk again. You drift toward the center of the village where the market will bloom again. Come morning, but now stand still, like a stage between performances. The stalls are collapsed, the goods packed away, and the canopies tied up neatly, their corners fluttering in the breeze like sleepy flags. But one figure remains. An older man seated on a low stool made of rough wood and prayer. His beard is streaked with gray, his robes the color of baked clay. He hums a tune that has no clear beginning or end. And laid before him, on a piece of indigo cloth, are dozens, maybe hundreds of cowries. Sorted, grouped, arranged, not by value or so it seems, but by story. You crouch beside him without speaking. He gestures just a flick of the hand and begins. This one, he says, lifting a shell with a small notch on the edge, once bought a goat with a limp who fathered 6 more goats, one of whom wandered into a schoolhouse. He chuckles. You blink. Another shell, this one speckled faintly like a quail egg. Paid for a wedding. The couple lasted 6 years, 3 children, and one epic argument about whether yams or plantains belong at festivals. You stifle a laugh. He continues. One shell after another, each with a tale that seems oddly specific, yet somehow familiar. A trade, a journey, a misunderstanding, a reunion. Historians might classify cowrie usage by kingdom or economy, but here in the soft lanterned dark, each shell is a chapter of ordinary lives. Some were gifts. Some were bribes. Some were carried across rivers in the hems of skirts or the folds of leather belts. One, he claims, was swallowed by a goat and passed 3 days later in front of a very unimpressed merchant. You make a face. He nods solemnly as if to say, yes, history is weird. Historians still debate whether these oral traditions represent actual transaction records or embellished community fables. Was this a collective ledger cleverly disguised as gossip, or simply the way people attached memory to object? The boundary between those two things grows blurry the more shells you hear about. Eventually, he hands you one. Yours is different, darker, slightly chipped. This one, he says quietly, was never spent. You glance up. It was carried for luck. Across miles, through seasons, never traded, just kept. Some shells are like that, carried for memory, not value. You weigh it in your hand. It's heavier than expected, but maybe that's just story clinging to it. You thank him not with words, but with the shared silence that follows, the kind that tastes like respect and evening, and the end of a very slow song. You walk back through the sleeping market, your new shell in one pocket, the carved spiral still in the other. A balance of memory and mystery. And then off to the side, you notice something small. A faded textile banner tied to a post. Weather-worn, nearly illegible. But embroidered at its center is a spiral of cowrie shells. You approach heart-tapping quietly. The design is simple, repetitive, but if you stare long enough, You begin to see the shift in pattern, the asymmetrical, turn the loop that breaks and reforms. It's not just decoration. It's a map of stories, of travels, of trade routes that weren't carved in stone but whispered in fields and sung along riverbanks. Not a map you follow with compass and lantern, but with listening. And maybe luck. Maybe that's how the Cowry moved, without orders, without armies. Not because it was rare, but because it meant something to the hands that held it. You return to your resting place near the fire. The embers have softened into a deep orange hum. You lie down, both shells clutched in your hands, now one, cool one, warm. And you let your mind wander back through the night, tracing the line of stories and people and improbable goats. You picture the shells moving not in crates or vaults, but in pockets, braided into hair, hidden in cooking pots, sewn into hems, passed hand to hand with no receipt, just trust. Click, pull, thread, beat. You hum the rhythm quietly as sleep finally begins to stretch its arms toward you. But just before your thoughts drift too far, you hear one more tale whispered as if through the crack in the night. One shell bought a story that outlived a king. You nod, eyes closed. That sounds about right. You wake to soft light pooling across your legs, the kind that arrives before birds fully commit to singing. There's a peace in the way the world breathes just before morning wakes all the way up. You roll slowly onto your side, not yet ready to stand, and listen to the coals cracking under their own quiet weight. Someone has placed a clay pot of water near the edge of the hearth. It steams gently, perfuming the air with lemongrass and something mintier, maybe basil. You stretch. Your bones pop gently like punctuation on a long, slow sentence. The two shells remain tucked near your pillow, the spiral warm now from sleep, and the darker one still chipped, but quietly important. You tuck them away again. Not in a pouch, but directly into your pockets. They've earned the upgrade. Today you walk a different path, one marked not by trees or stalls, but by murals. The outer walls of this village, like many across pre-colonial West Africa, are more than stone and thatch. They're canvases. And this morning, the sun hits them just right. A Cowry procession begins to unfold, painted in ochres and chalk's blues mixed from crushed shells and the ash of old fires. There's a row of Cowry shells at eye level each, with a different pair of hands depicted holding it. A farmer's hand, calloused and broad. A child's hand with ink smudges. A weaver's trailing thread. Even a musician's, the shell resting on the knuckles of someone holding a balafon mallet. Each image tells a story. Each story centers not on the shell, but the hand. You step slowly along the wall. As you move, the scenes change. A caravan of people crossing a savanna. The same Cowry being handed off from rider to trader to storyteller to elder. The shell itself grows more worn, with each panel more nicked, less shiny. But never lost. One section catches your eye. A figure seated before a fire surrounded by younger listeners. Their faces are lit from below, shadowed at the brow, all eyes focused on the teller. And painted into the folds of her robe, Cowries. Dozens. Like falling stars frozen in fabric. This is how history moves here, not just written in scrolls, but sewn, painted, worn. Historians still argue whether these murals served a strictly decorative role or functioned as local memory archives. Some believe they acted as visual contracts, reminders of community vows or economic records. Others think they were just beautiful things people made, because beauty is its own kind of truth. You sit before the final panel, a spiral again, but broader this time. Not a single Cowry, but many arranged in a swirl that bends outward toward the corners of the wall. At the center sits a tree. Unlabeled. Just there. You exhale and decide to follow the spiral. It leads you gently, almost accidentally, to a woman seated beneath the real version of that painted tree. Her hands are busy threading shells onto a cord. Not for sale by the looks of it. More like an offering. A remembrance. You watch silently until she glances up. She doesn't speak. She pats the ground beside her. You sit. She hands you a shell worn smooth and a piece of cord. You hesitate, then begin to string it through. You're not making anything useful. Not a bracelet or necklace. Just a line of shells. Maybe it's a garland. Maybe it's nothing. But the motion calms your breath. Click, pull, thread, beat. The rhythm returns. Not all cowries had monetary worth in every era. Some were ornamental, some sacred. In certain ceremonies, they were cast like runes. In others, they adorned the garments of griots, those oral historians who carried centuries in their lungs. And in West Africa, especially, across regions like Yorubaland, the Sahel, and the Ivory Coast, they often marked transitions, births, marriages, the passing of a season, the passing of a soul. You look down at your line of shells. They clack together gently, like old friends agreeing to one more cup of tea before heading out. You hand the strand back to the woman. She takes it without question, folds it into her lap. Then, almost casually, she sings. No melody you know, no words you understand. But the sound is familiar. Not because you've heard it before, but because it matches the place where your breathing lives, now slow low in the belly, steady as a drumbeat buried beneath story. It ends. She nods. You thank her again with quiet. You rise and begin walking, once more unsure of direction, but certain the path is part of the point. Every so often you spot another shell, tied to a fence post, tucked into a window frame, left beside a spring. Like breadcrumbs not meant to lead home, but to remind you that you're already there. You reach the edge of a field and the wind picks up. The tall grasses rustle with a dry harmony. And just beyond you catch the flash of another mural, this one painted on a storage hut. A cowry in the beak of a bird. Odd, but maybe not. You approach and see that it's been painted recently. The colors are brighter, less faded. Fresh brushstrokes still catch the sun. Someone somewhere is still telling stories. You don't need to know what the bird means, only that the shell's still moving. The day continues to unfold gently like a linen cloth shaken out under the sun. You walk the narrow path between huts and storage sheds, cowry shells still whispering to you in a language that doesn't need verbs, just patterns, pulses, and pauses. You reach a fork in the path marked not by a sign, but by a small pile of shells arranged into a circle at the base of a tree. You smile. This is how the world gives directions when it trusts you to listen. You follow the left path, winding slowly into a more open landscape. The trees thin out. The wind picks up dry and wide. In the distance, you spot movement not of people, but of fabric. Cloth strung between wooden frames flutters like sails from anchored ships. A dying field. The air smells different here. Sharp with minerals, earthy with fermenting indigo. A hint of smoke from some nearby kiln. You step closer. This is not a busy place. Most of the work is done in the cooler hours. But a few women move methodically through the cloth. Their hands are stained in varying hues, ultramarine rust, deep green, and tucked into their hair or threaded through earrings are cowries. Not many, just one or two, like punctuation on a poem that's still being written. One woman carries a basin on her hip and pauses beside a drying rack to adjust a strip of batik cloth. You notice it then, a pattern that spirals out from a cowrie shell stencil. Not abstract, exact. A literal print of a shell used like a signature. You step closer and run your fingers lightly over the fabric. The texture is slightly raised where the dye settled thickest. The shell's shape is preserved perfectly. One print repeated again and again with tiny imperfections in each. Human imperfections. A reminder that someone made this not with machinery, but with memory. Cowries weren't always just money. They were templates, stamps, icons. In many West African societies, they represented femininity, fertility, prosperity, and were often sewn into ceremonial clothing, not just to impress, but to invoke. To speak without sound, one shell might be hidden in a hem to protect a child, another sewn across a bodice to honor an ancestor. Historians still argue whether these uses were rooted more in superstition or social signaling. But does it matter? When a symbol endures, it tends to mean more than one thing at once. You watch as another woman rinses cloth in a basin, then hangs it carefully. Her fingers are practiced. She hums. You don't recognize the melody, but you feel its rhythm. Click, pull, thread, beat. It's everywhere now. You sit on a bench made of old tree limbs. Near your feet, a child plays with discarded thread spools and a cracked cowrie pretending it's a horse and carriage. You smile. Even the broken shells get to play a role. Someone offers you a drink, cool water from a calabash bowl, the rim etched with symbols. You accept sip, slowly the wood sweet and faintly smoky. A breeze stirs the fabric above you, casting rippling shadows across the ground. And in that moment, you realize this isn't a place of production. It's a place of transformation. Cloth thread water shell. Each element changed slightly by the others. Nothing leaves here as it came. You close your eyes and imagine the old roots caravans walking for weeks. Shells hidden in the folds of cloth bundles dipped in dye by mistake, or on purpose absorbing story and color and scent. Cowries became part of the textile itself. Maybe that's why they lasted. Not as brittle currency, but as adaptable language. Part of the code sewn into the garments of travelers and griots and farmers alike. You feel the sun shift and rise higher. Time to move again. You follow the smell of smoke to a low-domed hut, with thin streams of vapor rising through its roof vents. A pottery kiln, not active today, but still warm from yesterday's fire. Inside along the shelf sit dozens of small clay bowls and amulets all painted with swirls, and embedded in some are cowries, not resting in the bottom. Set right into the clay, a perfect fusion of shell and earth. Their ridged edges glint faintly in the dusty light like tiny moons, half swallowed by time. You run your fingers along one. It's warm, still holding heat from yesterday's burn. You think again of currency and how many ways something can hold value. Some cowries were buried with the dead sent into the next world as tolls or treasures. Others were placed in thresholds or hearths, guardians of domestic peace. Some were simply held by people who needed something smooth to hold when words ran dry. You pick one up and close your hand around it. You understand now why people didn't always trade these. Some shells weren't for market, some were for memory. You step out again, the dye fields to your back, the pottery hut to your side, and look toward the horizon. Distant hills shimmer faintly with heat. Somewhere beyond them lies the coast, and beyond that more stories. But you're not done here yet. There's still more to follow, still more spirals to trace, still more shells to carry forward. And as you walk on, you hum again, the old rhythm settling once more into your steps. Click, pull, thread, beat. The sun leans into its afternoon arc, now draping the village in soft gold and long shadows. You've left the dye fields behind, but the scent of earth and indigo still lingers faintly on your sleeves. You pass under a tree with low-hanging branches and a cluster of birds chatter above you like gossiping elders. Their feathers flash copper and cream as they dart between leaves. Somewhere nearby, someone is grinding grain, the rhythmic stone on stone, adding to the ambient heartbeat of the day. You follow the sound of a drum. Not loud, not demanding, just steady. It leads you toward a roundhouse on the edge of a low bluff, overlooking a slow-moving river. The thatch roof dips in the middle like a tired hat, and a line of carved gourds hangs from the rafters. You duck your head and enter, and the warmth inside is instant, not from heat, but from presence. 6 people sit in a circle, elders mostly. A few younger ones at the edges listening with wide eyes. A drum rests on one pair of knees, played by hands weathered like bark. No one stops when you enter. You're not interrupting. You're just arriving. The rhythm continues. Low, repetitive, a call and response without words. In the center of the circle lies a woven mat. On it, a pile of cowries. Not arranged, just placed. A man speaks, not loudly, not hurriedly. His voice has the cadence of river water and time. And as he talks, he picks up a shell, turns it in his fingers, and sets it down again. Each story is paired with a shell, a rhythm, a silence, a memory. You sit quietly on the edge of the circle. You don't understand the language, but you don't need to. The pauses say enough. The way one speaker nods slowly or closes their eyes. The way the drum always finds its way back to the same rhythm. Click, pull, thread, beat. These shells are not currency here. They're time markers, memory tokens, placeholders for grief, for joy, for lessons learned, the long way. One speaker lifts a cowrie and touches it to their forehead before setting it down again. The others bow their heads slightly. A death you suspect, or a farewell, or maybe both. Historians still debate the ceremonial role of cowries. Were they spiritual, symbolic, or just convenient portable objects onto which meaning was projected? But watching this circle, you see it clearly. They're anchors. Anchors for stories so fragile, they need a physical object to keep them from floating away. You watch the pile dwindle as each shell finds its place paired with its tail. Not permanently, no one's gluing anything. Just for now. For today, the shells will be gathered again, later stories folded back into silence, ready to be retold when needed. Eventually, the drum slows, then stops. A final shell is set down. The circle breathes in, and lets go. You step back outside. The wind is stronger now, tugging playfully at your clothes. The river below reflects the sky clouds drifting across its surface like dreams in no hurry. A small child runs past you chasing a goat that has apparently escaped its afternoon nap. Both of them zigzag through the grass like living brushstrokes. You walk down a path that leads to the river's edge. There you find a row of flat stones half submerged, stretching into the water like a handmade pier. You step onto the first one, carefully feeling the cool slap of water against your ankles. At the end of the row sits a woman with a basket beside her. She's cleaning something shells, a whole pile of them. Some cracked, some stained, all patiently rinsed and set to dry in the sun. She looks up and smiles, then returns to her task. One by one, she lifts each cowry, swishes it gently in the river, then places it on a woven mat beside her. The shells catch the light in different ways. Some dull, some gleaming. All beautiful. You watch her work, hypnotized by the rhythm. Not everything needs narration. Some things are better experienced in silence. She finishes her batch and offers you the basket. You kneel beside her and take a shell. It's smooth, slightly chipped at one end, but whole. You rinse it in the water, feeling the grains of sand scrub away under your fingertips. You place it on the mat. There, you've joined the rhythm now. Click, pull, thread, beat. It's in the movement, the breath, the pause between actions. You sit there together, two people connected not by language or need, but by repetition, by care, the act of cleaning what was once valued and maybe again. Behind you, the wind rustles the tall grass. A heron lifts off from the bank with a single effortless beat of its wings, and in that moment, you realize something. These shells, they outlast everything. War, trade, rulers, drought, debt, inflation they endure. Because they adapt. Because they mean what we say they mean. You look back at the basket of newly cleaned shells, sunlight painting them gold. They aren't currency now, but they were. And they might be again. Or not. Maybe they'll be stories, decorations, songs, whatever they are next, they'll carry the memory of what they've been. And maybe that's the truest kind of value. The sun is beginning its descent now, casting long fingers of light through the tall acacia trees. The shadows stretch like sleepy limbs, curling over paths and baskets and doorways, softening the hard lines of the day. You walk slower now, the pace of the village matching your own. A mutual exhale, an unspoken agreement that everything important has already happened and what's left can wait. The cowry shell is still in your palm. It's dry, now warm from the sun and from your skin. You turn it over with your thumb as you wander back toward the older part of the village where the houses huddle close and the walls lean in as though gossiping about what they've seen. You pass a doorway, framed with beads and feathers. Inside, a figure hunched over a loom, weaving fibers so fine you can barely see them. Their fingers move in practiced patterns, and you realize the threads aren't dyed. They're naturally colored. A gradient of earth tones, cream to rust, wrapped around a central motif. A spiral, of course. The weaver hums softly the melody, old and aimless like a lullaby for the hands. Outside the house, a small shrine sits tucked into the crook of a wall. It's modest, just a ledge of stone and a few offerings. A handful of millet clay figurine and 3 cowries placed carefully in a triangle. Not for spending, not for counting, for remembering. You kneel and offer one of your own, setting it gently beside the others. You whisper something, not a prayer exactly, just a note of thanks. For the stories, for the silence, for the rhythm that's carried you here. Historians still debate the moment cowrie shells fell from mainstream use in West Africa. Was it due to colonial disruptions of local economies? The imposition of Western currencies? Shifts in global trade routes? Most likely, it was all of these. But what they often miss is that cowries didn't disappear. They transformed. You walk again, the path guiding you toward a wider square where children play with hoops and sticks. Laughter bounces off the walls like birds startled into flight. 2 boys squat over a circle drawn in the dirt, playing a game that involves flicking cowries into specific patterns. It looks part luck, part strategy, all a concentration. one boy wins. He doesn't gloat. He just smiles and hands the shell back to his friend. It's not about ownership. It's about play. You take a seat on a low wall and let the scene drift around you. Evening folds in like a blanket, slow and deliberate. Fires are being lit in clay ovens. A pot clinks. A goat bleats its objections. Someone sings just out of view. Your shell feels heavier again, but in a comforting way. It has a role. It's been seen. You think back to that moment in the trading city with the echoing halls and hurried steps. The shell you bought with it still somewhere in the world. Passed along. Forgotten. Maybe. But present. The shell in your hand. It's yours now. But even that's temporary. Because shells don't really belong to people. They belong to movement. To meaning. To memory. You close your eyes for a moment, just long enough to listen. Not for words, but for rhythm. The whole village seems to breathe in time with it. Click, pull, thread, beat. You open your eyes and find yourself looking at an old mural on the far wall. It's chipped and sun-faded, but you can make it out. A woman holding out her hand. Not to take, to offer. And in her palm, a single Cowry shell. Behind her, stylized waves. In front of her, a child reaching forward. The cycle. The gift. The understanding that something so small can carry so much. You rise from your perch, brush the dust from your clothing, and begin walking again, not to get anywhere specific. Just to move in time with the world. The path is a little narrower now, lined with stones and low grasses. Fireflies are beginning to emerge, lighting the way with gentle pulses. Somewhere nearby, a drum starts up again. Slow and soft, just a heartbeat echoing across the evening air. At the edge of the village, you find a lone figure seated beneath a baobab tree. They look up as you approach, then pat the space beside them. You sit without speaking. The stars are beginning to show themselves, first in ones and twos, then in clusters. You both look up. You don't need to explain where you've been. They already know. You hand them the cowry. They hold it up to the light, examining the groove, the shine, the tiny imperfections. Then they nod and hand it back. Some things aren't meant to be kept, but they can be acknowledged. You pocket it once more. The drum slows. So do your thoughts. And together you sit in the hush between stories. The night settles fully now, like a woven canopy stretched over the world. The sky has deepened into a velvet blue pricked with stars that blink lazily, like they've seen this story play out 1,000 times before. But you're still here, still listening. Still following the invisible thread that's brought you from the market to the grove, to the sea, and now, to the quiet edge of sleep. The baobab's thick trunk creaks gently as it settles in the cooling air. The figure beside you has begun to hum a tune without words, one that might be centuries old, or made up just now. You lean your head back against the bark, which is rough but grounding. The cowry in your pocket is warm again. Or maybe it's just your hand. It's hard to say. Historians still puzzle over how cowry shells small as a fingernail, and a native to the Indian and Pacific Oceans, traveled so far inland into West Africa. Some claim they were carried up the rivers by enterprising traders. Others point to the ancient trans-Saharan trade routes, winding from salt mines to gold fields, linking distant kingdoms and unlikely allies. Some even suggest the shells arrived through shipwrecks or drifting currents. But those explanations miss the most important point. They were wanted. They were chosen. Because the people who received them didn't just see objects, they saw potential. A shell wasn't just shiny, it was useful, durable, beautiful, symbolic, and easily countable, which in a pre-decimal economy is an underrated trait. You hear a story, once half fact, half folklore, about a West African queen who wore an entire robe of cowry shells. Each one stitched by hand, each one representing a negotiation, a promise of victory. When she walked, the robe whispered, not just of wealth, but of wisdom, of choices made over time, of value beyond coin. Cowries could be sewn into hats, into hems, into belts worn in battle. They jingled like armor, laughed like children, whispered like ancestors. You walk again now, but the village is behind you. The path has shifted. You're somewhere between places, not fully in the real world, not entirely in myth. The ground feels softer, as if woven from memory itself. Each step quiet, intentional. In the distance, a river glows. It doesn't rush. It meanders like your thoughts. The water is low tonight, shallow and silken, running over smooth stones. The moon reflects in it doubled by the ripples. And there tucked just along the riverbank is a single cowry. Not planted, not displayed, just there, waiting. You stoop to pick it up but hesitate. Instead, you study it. The color is familiar cream with soft golden undertones. The groove running down its back catches the moonlight like a smile. It's perfect but not pristine. The edges are worn, the ridges softened by time. This one's seen things. You leave it where it is. Because sometimes the value of a thing lies in its being found, not taken. Nearby frogs begin to croak in overlapping rhythm. You find a patch of grass and sit again, knees pulled to your chest, watching the reflections change shape with the river's slow breath. The air here smells like wet earth and jasmine, a scent older than markets, older than shrines. You think about the storytellers, the ones who passed along not just legends, but ledgers, the griots, the memory keepers, the ones who could recite a king's entire lineage backwards while chewing sugarcane. They knew the worth of a shell wasn't just in trade. It was in tale. You imagine one now, a griot seated before a fire, voice low and smooth, a string of cowries wrapped around one wrist. Each one a bookmark, each one a moment. The children clustered at his feet, trying not to blink, afraid to miss even a word. He tells of how the shells came from the sea, yes, but also how they knew where they were needed. How they sought hands that would honor them, stories that would carry them. And maybe, just maybe, how one shell in particular ended up in your pocket tonight. You look down. It's still there. You smile. Your breath slows as the stars ripple in the river's reflection. A gentle wind brushes past your face, lifting a few strands of hair and dropping them again without ceremony. Somewhere to your left, a spider spinned a web between two reeds. You're not surprised. Of course, she's here. Of course, she's always been here. Not in temples or tombs, but in the corners of things, in the threads and fibers, in the grooves of shells and the lips of bowls. Quiet, deliberate, persistent. The river murmurs. The wind hums. The stars blink once more. You lie down fully now, the grass beneath you cool and forgiving. The sky arches overhead so wide and steady that for a moment you forget how small you are. And then you remember. And it feels just right. Because small isn't powerless. Small can be sacred. And value, real lasting value, can come in the humblest shapes. A seed. A thread. A shell. Especially a shell. Especially tonight. The world softens further as you lie there beside the river. The curve of the bank cradling your form like an old friend. The grass beneath you smells faintly of sun and stories. It's the kind of scent that makes you feel like you're being remembered by the land, not just resting on it. You tilt your head slightly and notice more shells along the water's edge now. Not many, just a few scattered like stars that have fallen from the sky and washed up on shore. Some are half buried in the mud, some tucked into the tangled roots of reeds, and just one is lodged between two stones rocking gently with each breath of the river. None of them shine like treasure. They don't need to. They simply exist, glowing quietly in the moonlight. You wonder how many hands they've passed through. A trader's fingers perhaps sorting them into sacks. A bride's hands stitching them into her hair. A priest's palms lifting them skyward in silent invocation. A child's grip muddy and full of questions. Each cowry a chapter. Each chapter unread until someone looks closer. Historians still debate how standardized cowry shell currency actually was. Were there official weights, scales, regulations? Or was it all based on community trust and experience, like a good handshake or a well-timed proverb? In some records, entire marketplaces functioned without coinage, relying entirely on shells and reputation. It's hard to wrap your modern brain around that. The idea of a value system not driven by fixed numbers or glittering metals, but by memory, mutual understanding, and a shell with a history. But then again, isn't that what value is? Something we agree to believe in. You roll onto your side and listen. To the insects clicking like tiny clocks. To the river sighing through its pebbles. To the fireflies sinking their glow in ways no calendar could track. There's something deeply soothing about this kind of economy, the slow economy. The one where value builds over time, layer by layer, like silk or sediment. Nothing rushed, nothing showy, just steady, just true. You sit up slowly and stretch your limbs, creaking like the trunks of old trees. You brush the grass from your sleeves and begin walking once more, drawn upstream toward a rise in the landscape. A small footpath winds through low brush, and you follow it by instinct more than intention. At the top of the rise, the view opens. Below you, the village tucked in like a folded cloth. Lanterns flicker in clusters. A few smoke trails curl upward from cooking fires still glowing in their clay ovens. Somewhere a lullaby is being hummed. And beyond all that, the sea. You hadn't noticed how close it was before. But now, you see its black glass shimmer just beyond the hills. It's always there, of course, offering, receiving, sending. The sea is the beginning and the end of the Cowry story. And yours, maybe. You settle onto a flat stone that's been warmed from the day and now just holds onto that heat like a pleasant memory. From here, the Cowry shell in your pocket feels like a link between you and everything you've walked through tonight. You imagine the shell's own memory, its journey from coral reef to coin pouch, from goddess offering to bride's dowry, from lost under floorboards to found in an elder's hand. It has outlived empires, outlasted trade routes, outshined gold, not in glitter, in grace. You close your eyes and trace the grooves of the shell again. This time you don't need to look. You know them by heart now. The smoothness, the cool curve, the tiny ridge like a spine. You hum just softly. Click, pull, thread, beat. A rhythm that matches not just weaving but walking. Not just trading, but trusting. You open your eyes to find the moon has climbed even higher, lighting the slope in silver. A breeze moves through the brush like a question whispered too late at night. And you finally understand the shell's true purpose. It isn't about currency. It's about continuity. A reminder passed from hand to hand saying, you were here. You mattered. You shaped something. You carried something forward. The Cowry is proof. Proof that even the smallest thing can hold the largest meaning. You rise once more, not in haste, not to chase anything but to keep going. To follow the thread of story wherever it leads next. You step lightly, the grass parting before you, like a curtain drawn back for one final act. And you go not away from this place but deeper into it. Into the memory. Into the myth. Into the hum that's been beneath your feet this whole time. Click. Pull. Thread. Beat. And beneath that, something older still. A pulse. A presence. The knowing that you've been walking through a story not just told, but lived. And now, you are part of it. You follow the downward slope as dawn begins to think about returning. The sky hasn't brightened yet, but the edges of things are beginning to breathe again. Shadows softening, stars blinking out one by one like tiny oil lamps snuffed in order. The earth smells different now. Less of heat and more of dew. You tread carefully along the shoreline path, your steps muffled by fine sand and broken shells. The sea has edged closer in the dark, lapping at the base of rock and root. It leaves little offerings, smoothed driftwood, tangled seaweed, the occasional crab leg that looks like it once belonged to a tiny armored noble. And of course, more cowries. They rest like punctuation marks in the story you've been following all night. One here nestled between footprints. One there caught in a tide pool like it's waiting to be noticed. You pause at a larger pool deep and still enough to hold the reflection of the stars above. The surface shimmers faintly, and as you kneel beside it, a ripple shifts the image just enough to make you blink. For a moment, only a moment, you think you see a face beneath the surface. Eyes like polished shell, a brow furrowed in concentration, a mouth whispering something you can't quite hear. You exhale and the vision fades, but the feeling lingers. You're not alone. Not in a haunted way. In a remembered way. You dip your fingers into the pool and stir gently. The water is cool, smooth, and briny. As it settles again, a single cowry floats upward from the silt and comes to rest against your knuckle. You lift it slowly as if plucking a thought from the bottom of someone else's dream. This one is paler than the others, almost translucent. It reminds you of something left unsaid, of something still to come. Historians still wonder how cowries achieved such vast distribution. How did something so fragile travel thousands of miles across forest and desert, river and ridge? Was it the trade networks alone, the influence of early empires? Or was it something more intuitive, an aesthetic, spiritual, or symbolic thread shared across human cultures? Some suggest that cowries were used because they mimic certain forms in nature. Eyes, seeds, mouths. That perhaps the shell's resonance is more primal than practical. That's the kind of mystery you like best. One with no answer. Only layers. You continue walking the sky, now shifting above you in pinks and pale saffron. The first bird calls are timid, just 2 or 3 testing the quiet. The rest will come soon, but for now the world is still yours. Yours and hers. Because she's here, you realize. The shell whisperer. The goddess with seafoam breath and shoreline wisdom. Not Aphrodite, though. She gets the press. No, this one is quieter. Older. A memory wrapped in tide and time. Maybe not a named goddess at all, but something vaster. Something like Arachne, but of water and sand. Of trade and tribute. A Cowry deity. The mother of subtle economies. You smile at the idea. Somewhere a historian just twitched. You crest the final dune and see the harbor below you. It's barely more than a pier and a few masts, but in the early light it shines like an offering bowl. A small market is already stirring beside it, canopies being tied down, fish laid out in woven trays, bundles of herbs arranged in jars. A woman sweeps her threshold humming to herself. A boy pours goat's milk into earthen cups for sale. Someone's already started boiling millet porridge, and the smell of cinnamon curls into the breeze. And nestled among the coins and carved tokens on every mat, cowrie shells. Some whole, some split and polished, some painted with crimson dots or lined with thin strokes of indigo dye. Still in circulation, still understood, still loved. You move through the stalls slowly, not to buy, not to browse, but to witness, to absorb the last signs of the story you've walked through. You pass a cloth merchant who's stitching shells into the hem of a cobalt tunic, a basket weaver whose handles are strung with cowries for luck, a tiny girl holding one in her closed fist like it's a secret. You see the shell in everything now, in the loop of thread, in the curve of pottery, in the swirl of the sea. The currency of Cowry was never just about buying. It was about believing. Believing in beauty. Believing in stories. Believing that something small could still carry something vast. You reach the edge of the harbor and sit on a low stone wall, feet dangling above the water. The tide laps gently below. You open your hand and look at the cowrie shell you've carried through this whole wandering night. It has changed. Or maybe you have. It's no longer just a relic or relic token. It's a key, a cipher, a reminder that value is more than gold or grain. It's memory and meaning and the soft hush of something that lasts. You close your fingers around it again and listen. Click, pull, thread, beat. Your breath matches it. Your pulse follows it. And as the morning sun climbs above the sea, spilling light like warm milk across the world, you know one thing for sure. You will remember this. And now, so will the shell. You stay on the harbor wall a little longer, watching the light bloom across the water in soft ribbons of peach and gold. The town is fully waking now, slowly, kindly, not with shouts or urgency, but with the quiet rhythm of daily things unfolding. A broom against stone. A chicken announcing itself somewhat prematurely. A merchant shaking out a striped awning, watching it catch the breeze like a sail. Your fingers curl gently around the cowrie shell in your palm. Its familiar shape warmed by your skin. You don't need to look at it anymore. It's imprinted on you now. Its ridged back. Its soft luster. Its shape like a closed eye keeping secrets. Behind you, a donkey clops by dragging a cart with 2 sleepy cabbages and 1 very alert rooster. The driver nods at you and mutters a greeting that sounds like it's been passed down for generations, a syllable worn smooth by time. You nod back. Some languages don't need translation. You stand brushing a bit of sea mist from your tunic and begin the slow walk back up through the town. The stalls are fully set now. The fish have found their ice. The goats have found trouble. And the shells. They're everywhere if you know how to look. One sits at the base of a door frame tucked in like a guardian. Another swings from a necklace strung with coral and tiny bells. A third has been embedded into a clay jar, just one placed like punctuation on an otherwise plain pot. Each one quietly declaring someone remembered. Historians still argue how long the cowrie remained a dominant currency. Some peg its decline to the arrival of colonial coinage. Others argue it never truly vanished, it just evolved, becoming more sacred, more symbolic, a bead of memory rather than barter. But here, as you pass the shadow of a mud brick home with cowries strung across its lintel like stars, you know it hasn't ended. It's just resting, waiting for the next story. You stop in a small courtyard where an old woman sits beneath a fig tree. Her hands are busy wrapping something in dyed cloth red and ochre patterned with spirals. You pause politely, and she looks up with eyes that seem older than time but sharp as a sparrow's. You nod toward the bundle. A gift. She shrugs. A memory. She untucks a corner of the cloth just enough for you to glimpse what's inside. A row of cowrie shells. Not the freshest. Not the prettiest. But lined up perfectly. Thoughtfully. Their placement deliberate. Their presence undeniable. You say nothing. There's nothing that needs saying. You smile, and she returns it with the kind of grin that suggests she's seen people come and go. Stories rise and fall, and still, the shells remain. You leave her in peace and continue through the alleys, winding your way toward the grove once more. The trees are quieter in the morning light, their silver leaves glinting as if nodding approval. You pass under them again, slower this time. Reverent. You reach the hollow tree, Arachne's tree, and crouch low. The web is still there, of course. Slightly dewed now. Slightly stretched. But intact. A monument not to victory, but to resilience. And in its center a new thread. Finer than the rest. Just begun. You exhale slowly and feel the weight of your night's walk settle in your bones, not as heaviness, but as warmth. The warmth of something understood. Of something remembered correctly. You sit again beneath the tree, the cowrie shell in your hand cool and quiet. You place it gently beside the web, not too close, not to disturb, but just near enough to let them talk if they wish. The thread. The shell. Two myths side by side. You lean your head back against the bark and let your eyes drift upward. The sky has finished changing clothes. Now it's full morning blue. A few wisps of cloud stretch across it like soft banners. A bird calls overhead, and somewhere far off the sea continues its steady humming work. And now here in this final hush, you understand. Arachne's story wasn't about punishment. It was about persistence. And the cowrie's value wasn't in the transaction. It was in the transmission. What you carry, what you pass on, what endures. Even when no one is looking. Even when history forgets. You close your eyes. And now the wind down begins. Let your breath settle now. You've wandered through time across forested trade routes and quiet groves along coastlines where waves stitch memory into shore. You've watched hands pass shells with care, thread webs with intention, and kneeled beside fires with stories in their bones. Let your shoulders relax. Let your eyes soften. You are no longer walking. You are no longer carrying. You are resting. The grove holds you. The earth beneath you is warm. The leaves above you rustle like a lullaby written in a language you don't need to understand. Somewhere nearby a thread is being spun. Somewhere else a shell is being lifted into light. You don't need to do anything now. Just be here. Just breathe. Click. Pull. Thread. Beat. The story continues without urgency, without pressure. Like a pot kept warm by ember, like a shell waiting in the sand. You're part of it now, and it's glad to have you. Sleep now. The threads will keep spinning, and the cowries will keep whispering. You are remembered. You are wrapped in story. You are home.